Now, recently on this channel, Police Commissioner Fanie Masemola admitted that the SAPS is spread far too thin. In fact, he believes the service should be doubled from the current 150,000 to at least 300,000 people on the ground. Add to that problems of corruption, inadequate skills and resources within the police. It's not surprising how lawless parts of the country have become. And of course, as lawlessness increases, communities look to what they can do to protect themselves, which can have its own problems, of course. Let's speak now to researcher Ropafadzo Maphosa from the SA Institute for Advanced Constitutional, Public, Human Rights and International Law at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As soon as someone says to me vigilante mob justice, I think PAGAD, which of course is People Against Gangsterism and Drugs. It started as a community safety forum. It escalated into the public murder of gang leader Rashad Stachy in 1996. And then just recently we've seen what happened in Zandspruit, the mob killing of 8 men. In the past 25 years or so, since Rashad Stachy was killed publicly by PAGAD, has mob justice increased, decreased, or changed in any significant way in South Africa?
Afternoon, Sally. Thank you for having me, and also good afternoon to your viewers. I would say the pattern remains pretty much the same when you look at the manner in which mob justice actually functions. The same way that it worked, for example, during the apartheid era, the basis for it and also the modus operandi remains the same even to this day.
Effective policing clearly is absolutely vital. Arrests, prosecutions as well. Do you believe that until we've doubled our police force, we're not actually going to make a real difference?
That's a very interesting question. I guess it all really comes down, in my opinion, to police allocation, because we could double the police force and still find that the areas that are currently affected by a lack of effective police services remain in that same position simply because they're not taken seriously. So one of the reasons why we see mob justice becoming prevalent in South Africa is because communities feel that the police are not responsive or they're nonchalant to the prevalence of crime in their communities. So in addition to doubling the police force, I think we should also ensure that the communities that are currently affected receive police attention instead of simply doubling it in affluent communities that already have sufficient police resources.
It's interesting what's happening in eNCA. There's a project called LEAP, which is about, in part, getting more boots on the ground, which they say is starting to have an impact on the rate of murder. But so often in these situations, managing crime is a multi-pronged issue. It's not just about policing, is it?
Definitely. And I think in addition to just policing, you'd also notice that some of the reasons offered by those who are perpetrators of mob justice is just general frustration with the justice system, because there are instances where crime is had and perpetrators of criminal activities are actually arrested. But then the justice system takes time in prosecuting these persons. So in addition to the lack of police resources, sometimes there are delays in the justice system that also lead to frustration within communities. And in the case of vigilantism against immigrants, you'll notice that it's not simply about lack of police response. It's also frustration with unemployment and living conditions and deplorable socioeconomic conditions as well. So it goes deeper than just the lack of police resources.
You know, mob justice, and this is the thing, because it's not done in an orderly fashion with gathering of evidence, sifting through the evidence, weighing and challenging the evidence, it's often wrong and often targets vulnerable people. As foreigners, as one example, and as you've indicated, how concerned are you about the work of groups such as Operation Dudula, which, you know, initially gained praise for good acts such as protecting Maponya Mall during the July unrest, but now seems to be increasingly targeting foreigners, legal and illegal?
Absolutely. I think I personally am very concerned also as an immigrant that is currently living in South Africa, a legal immigrant. But if I were to be caught or confronted, I don't think there would even be time for questions about whether or not I'm presently resident in South Africa. And that is the situation that most foreigners find themselves in currently in South Africa, where they don't even have an opportunity to plead their case. And that is a problem we have with mob justice, because there is no right of fair trial, which is actually guaranteed by the Constitution. Because if the legal system were to be followed in cases of arresting illegal immigrants in South Africa, there would be an opportunity for those people to at least appear before a court. But when operations such as Operation Dudula take over, that opportunity is taken away. And often the punishment for being illegally resident, instead of it being deportation, turns into something more violent, as we saw in the case of Elvis Nyati a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. And I wonder as well how difficult it is to prosecute a mob justice. I know that we've been looking as well at what's happened in Zandspruit, but when a group of people get together, it's quite tricky to find the perpetrators. Am I right?
Absolutely. And most times you'll find that the perpetrators are found, or the so-called perpetrators rather, are simply placed before the community based on mere suspicion. Most times there's not even evidence that these are the correct perpetrators in the particular case. There is no evidence before a court. It's simply just a kangaroo court based on rumors or suspicions. Yes, of course, sometimes the correct individuals are identified, but that is not always the case.
The other thing that we hear from the police quite a lot, and more so recently, is calling on the community to trust the police. And the police often says, and Becky Cele has often said this, you know who the criminals are in your community. Why don't you tell us? Mm-hmm. What do you think is at the heart of that lack of trust? Is it because communities simply don't see effective policing? Is it that simple, actually?
That's interesting, because it could be a number of factors, but I do feel most of it in part stems from the lack of policing that they see. I wrote an article a while back when the Zandspruit incident occurred, and most of the things that were said by local community members involved the fact that when the police officials were called to crime scenes, most times they did not even show up. And if they did, it would often be too late. By then, the criminals would have escaped. So you find that community members do not simply just resort to mob justice. They often try to engage with the police. And it is only when they feel that the police has failed to engage with them that they take matters into their own hands.
Is mob justice on the increase? Or are we just seeing it more because we've all got cell phones? I mean, Pagad was filmed by cameras in 1996. Nowadays, everyone's got a camera on their phone. But is mob justice actually on the increase?
Personally, I'm not aware of the statistics, Sally, otherwise I would tell you, but I do think you have a point that maybe it's becoming more visible because more people are speaking about it. Many people would deny that there's xenophobic attacks at all in South Africa, and that simply these are isolated incidents. So it's difficult to tell whether really mob justice incidents are on the rise or not.
So where do we start? Mob justice is clearly a problem. We're still seeing acts of mob justice, Zandspruit, Diepsloot, and more. Where do we start, and what's the best way to start in tackling issues of mob justice?
I think the first thing would be for the police officials to start to listen to what it is that the communities are actually saying. Whenever there's an incident of mob justice, we see, for example, the police spokesperson or the commander of the police showing up to those communities and listening to concerns. But it seems that thereafter, nothing is actually done about the concerns that are raised by community members. So the first step would be to hear what the underlying causes are between that are the reason why people feel the need to take the law into their own hands. So aside from just showing up when the incidents happen and then forgetting immediately what was raised in those meetings, I think our officials actually need to start taking what it is that people are saying very seriously. Otherwise, we are going to continue to see this kind of incidents taking place.
Often community safety forums are such a great idea because it is a sign of a proactive community looking after their community. How do we ensure that those proactive community safety forums don't cross that line into vigilantism? What often is that trigger?
I think the trigger usually actually comes from pure frustration, in my opinion, because we will see that instead of government officials working together with these proactive groups, they often try to denounce the work that they're doing. And I think when this happens, that can trigger frustration and also just the need to emphasize whatever it is that these communities are advocating for. And sometimes that then crosses the line between a peaceful protest and a violent one.
All right, thank you so much for chatting to us. Very interesting insights. Ropafadzo Maphosa, she's from the SA Institute for Advanced Constitutional, Public Human Rights and International Law at the University of Johannesburg.